Thank you very much, Professor. After 1 year, and now I think we got your book middle of last year, and this is post-Davos discussion. While the world is facing some sort of so-called trilemma of development, middle income and climate. And after 1 year of discussion, I would like to revisit on what we have discussed. And what is your overview throughout this particular 12 months and moving ahead, another unknown era of 12 months?
Yeah, considering the turmoil the world has been in, I think Left Behind has stood the test pretty well, really. There's not much I'd want to change in it, really. Indeed, I'm invited around the world basically to say, I told you so. But more seriously, I think Malaysia is, you're actually pretty well positioned. You might face the middle income trap, which so many other middle income countries have faced. Right. But I think compared to most, you're in a good position.
Right. Well, I would like to quote something from your book, in which you said, sustainable nation or sustainable world will need 3 essentials: communities, states, and moral bounds. And in your research and observation, there are many instances in each thriving in isolation, but far too few in which all 3 are found together.
That's right. That's right.
And my question is on how to reset and looking into where to start. And definitely my session on rewrite or rewriting development, we try to find what is the best or how to deploy the balancing act in these particular 3 matters.
Yeah, so I still think that basic idea of 3 conditions that some countries have actually managed to get all 3 combined, but far too few. The fact that some have done it shows that it's possible. The fact that most haven't done it shows what huge potential there is for public policy to be better. Now, this place where we are now is dedicated to improving public policy, and there's a long way to go.
We would like to understand, how do you see your views on the gap? What should the government and what should the people at the same time in terms of public policy, as well as the dynamic between private and government, in terms of, first we need to understand what are the gaps, secondly, and how to narrow this gap?
Yeah, okay, so let's, do we want to focus on Malaysia or anywhere in particular?
I think just let's zoom from Malaysia, ASEAN as the most stable and peaceful region in the world at this point in time, and looking into bigger picture of middle income countries.
Yeah, so Malaysia itself, I think, is really well positioned. You've got a leader who I think has got a lot of experience, on both sides of the of the big political divide between those in power and those are the victims of abused state power. There's nobody else like your present Prime Minister for experiencing that, because he's been in jail for long periods for crimes that he didn't commit, I think. You've got a good leader. Have you got and that's one way in which societies can improve, is through good leadership. The other is through a bottom-up process. And you've a lot of potential there, because the bottom-up process can be driven both by citizens, in sort of citizen organizations, like, for example, Yunus did in, next door in Bangladesh, or through good businesses who are pro-social. And pro-sociality in business doesn't mean that you shouldn't aim to make a profit. Of course you've got to make a profit. Yeah. If you're not making a profit, you're not sustainable.
Of course.
But it does mean that you have purposes beyond just your own profit. And the most successful companies on earth over the long historical period have tended to do just that. They've run their business in a way that devolved a lot of decisions to employees, and thereby, by empowering employees, you get a lot of innovation. Now, at the moment, quite a few very big companies have the opposite design. They depend upon some superstar who tells himself, I'm the most brilliant person on earth, and I just you give your money to me, and I'll run things. We don't have to look very hard to find people like that. They're pretty dangerous. I personally happen to believe that Elon Musk is pretty dangerous because he's moved beyond his commercial aspirations, some of which are good, some of which are not very good, into political aspirations where really that's an abuse of power.
Right. You mentioned Dr. Muhammad Yunus of Bangladesh, and I think I would like to touch on what he said during the session, one of the plenary session during the World Economic Forum. He has a piece of good advice to ASEAN leaders and ASEAN at large for the Southeast Asia countries. In a way, what he said, I quote, "Following the same outdated footsteps of the past won't bring any good, and we must avoid the issue of wealth concentration entirely." So, and at the same time, your book, and you keep on stressing on the morality of common purpose. So I try to understand and try to bind these two together.
Yeah, so I think Muhammad Yunus exemplifies a lot of that he ran a very, very pro-social business, which devolved power of decision to, basically it was a model of poor women, forming these credit clubs, little credit clubs. It was a brilliant model. Still is a brilliant model, I think, actually. I think there's still a lot of scope for it. And so that he did at quite a considerable scale, matched by BRAC, which is the largest NGO on earth. So you've got Yunus and BRAC, and between them that transformed Bangladesh despite awful political leadership. So there was Bangladesh, which grew pretty fast, with very poor political leadership, overcome by this bottom-up movement. And finally, the political leadership was so bad that it came to grief. And so Yunus, very late in life, finds himself the political leader. And that is a real opportunity for Bangladesh. And it's brilliant that he's reached out to student youth movement to say, you're the future. I'm a very old guy, but I want to empower you. And that's a very exciting model of an old guy who's so old that and he's reached the top politically, so that his entire interest is not himself, it's the future of Bangladesh. If you're in your 80s, what you're going to care about?
Of course.
It's not your own power, it's what can I leave as a legacy for this country? And so there's a very exciting alliance between the oldest and the youngest. I think that is a model which might extend much more widely. And of course, you know, Malaysia is potentially got that structure. You've got a good, wise old political leader, not quite as old as Yunus, right. And so you can, you know, he can reach out to both to business and to youth.
One of the key takeaway point from Nigeria, because you mentioned Nigeria, and I think last year when they took such a bold move by taking out fuel subsidies, and it has created some sort of chaos at the very beginning, but somehow the recalibration happened. Not many countries have the luxury to do the same, and Malaysia some sort of putting gradual process in making sure the distribution of the subsidies more fair and equitable, and that has to be reflected into our growth. And looking from that angle, because you touch on leadership a lot, you have one particular figure and the rest of the combination and the dynamic of the structure, and at the same time you touch a lot also on the morality, and looking from this particular angle, and now we want to translate this into action. For example, in this case, contributive justice, from moving from distributive justice to contributive justice.
Yeah, that's right. So, so I work with Michael Sandel, and I think this is really very, very exciting. I mean, our work has moved on since over the last year, there are two parts to what Sandel sees as contributive justice. First, the essence of moving from distributive justice to contributive justice is that everybody actually has a duty to contribute to the whole.
Right.
And so it's not just a matter of the government taking from one group and giving to another, which is the sort of fuel subsidies stuff, but saying, no, everybody actually has a duty to contribute, including car drivers, you know. So you can't just swan around enjoying subsidies. That's taking, it's not contributing. But the other side to Michael Sandel's concept is to say, but in order for there to be a duty to contribute to the whole, certain conditions have to be met. Mm-hmm. And in particular, I'll emphasize two. One is equality of voice. So the poorer people at the bottom of society have to be treated with sufficient respect that their voice is listened to and heard with equal force to the well-connected, successful people. And so equality of voice, so that the common purposes that you talk about are agreed in an equitable fashion in which the poorer people can contribute as much to that discussion as the more successful people. In Britain, that certainly hasn't happened. And then the other condition, so one is equality of voice, but the other is that poorer people have to be in a position materially to be able to contribute. So they have to be properly paid. And that means not just scraping along in, working for a pittance in a call centre. They've got to be sufficiently well rewarded that they can afford to contribute. Doesn't mean they have to be as rich as other people, as the successful people. It's perfectly justifiable often for the rich people to earn more than the poor people. So it's not about equality, but it's about everybody being in a position materially so that they're not hand to mouth. They're in a position to contribute.
Well, at the same time, the reality on ground, you speak to the people, of course, they talk about income, wages, and their pocket, food prices, quality of life. And all of this somehow encompasses their needs and wants at the same time. And you touch on the hidden despair as well as the hidden privilege. So I would like to go on the hidden privilege and where the standard measure of inequality of incomes need to be supplemented with something more sophisticated.
Yes.
Which is, you said, life chances.
That's right.
How does that work?
Life chances is about if you're born in the bottom part, say bottom third of society,
Right.
what's your chances later in life of rising into the top third or so? Right? So that's a measure of social mobility. And it is measured, not for every country in the world, but for 22 countries. There are now good data on that form of life chances. Which countries have pretty equal life chances and which countries have very unequal.
It's no longer just about the Gini coefficient.
Not at all. That just takes a snapshot now. I mean, if I took you into a coffee bar, right, there'd be a student who's on a student grant, an Oxford student on a student grant, and the student grant is probably smaller than the guy who's being paid to serve him a cup of coffee. And I ask you, which one has the better life chances? The guy who's serving the coffee or the guy who's got the Oxford degree?
Of course.
And obviously, the measure of current income inequalities is a very poor predictor of these life chances. So it's life chances that really matter. We're in Britain at the moment, which has about the most unequal life chances of any high-income country. So whatever we are doing, don't do.
Right.
That's a simple rule.
Yeah,
right?
I guess that's what Dr. Muhammad Yunus meant when he advised ASEAN not to follow the old paradigms of doing things.
Absolutely.
So, well, my next question is, of course, in order for us to, to rewrite development, and you yourself, sir, as a world-renowned development economist, looking at the things in which today everything has been challenged. Democracy has been challenged, social democracy has been challenged, capitalism has been challenged, the trust towards the government, trust towards each other, everything has been challenged, up to the point that we are walking in the line of transition towards the unknown. And this is the best part. We have ABCD, artificial intelligence, battle of big brothers, US, China, climate change, and we are entering the age of depopulation. Okay, how to navigate as a government?
Yeah, so what you're facing is uncertainty, big time.
Big time, yeah.
Right?
Anxious, everyone has anxiety.
Even more than you were facing last year, but it's really about uncertainty, right? And there are very practical things you can do if you're facing uncertainty. Don't pretend that you know what you're doing. Right? Admit to uncertainty. That's the first rule for any leader. Admit that there's uncertainty. Right? And then what you do if you're uncertain? You find out what works at the moment, what works, what seems to work best. Of course, the big uncertainties now are, what will President Trump do? Right? Well, I don't know. I doubt whether President Trump knows. Right? Because he's got very mixed signals within his own team. Right?
It's a different style of leadership.
Yes,
That one we have to
yes. Indeed, his whole business life has thrived on generating uncertainty. Right? So he consciously produces uncertainty and finds opportunities in his business to make money out of that uncertainty, and in his politics he's doing the same. So nobody knows what he'll do, including him.
I think what we know
that's
about,
deliberate.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there are things you can do to say, well, let's try and see what might work. Right? So very practical things that you can do, which explore, for example, you explore links with China, you explore links with America. You explore links with the American government, but you also explore links with American firms. You explore links with the Chinese government, but also explore links with Chinese firms. Huge opportunities for Malaysia with Chinese firms. I mean, you just signed a deal this week, I think, on the special economic zones with Singapore. That's brilliant. You're going to partner with about the most successful country on earth, which is Singapore, and you've got one really big asset that Singapore lacks, which is space. Right?
That's nice. Yeah.
And a second big asset is you've got people.
Of course.
Right? So you've got space and people, and that's a fantastic opportunity. That special economic zone sounds to me like a very, very good idea. And then you come up with a very clever idea about generating energy, which is a two-tier system. You've divorced the energy that's going to be used in the zone, which is full of these very energy-intensive data storage systems. And they really are capable, because they're capable of paying much higher prices for the energy they need or want. And that detaches the price to domestic users from the price that these new businesses are willing to pay. That's a very clever structure of pricing. I wish we would do that here. I wish we would do that in Britain. So Britain could learn a lot from what Malaysia's doing. We won't, because the British government and the British civil service is far too arrogant to learn from Malaysia. And so it will suffer, unlike Malaysia. We have the most expensive energy in Europe at the moment.
Nice to hear that, but at the same time we also, I think, share a lot of challenges from many perspectives. I think given ASEAN region as the most peaceful and stable region in the world, and we are set to be the third, fourth largest economy in the world, and of course putting the right model, in which we don't know what is the right model, but what we know, your advice is do not follow the old steps or old footsteps, in which looking at the rate that we are going, there are a lot of new things that need to be explored, from technological advancement as well as putting the right focus on the talent. And I think we are on the right trajectory with regards to TVET, the vocational, the technical. And what would be your advice to ASEAN leaders in order not to get distracted by a lot of factors?
I think you can learn a lot from from success. And success is right next door in Singapore, where there's been a focus on, yes, on education, but on whole class teaching, in which the brightest students are expected to help the slower students, so that the pace of the class is set at the slowest learners, and that gives the brightest an incentive to help the slower learners. So that reconciles high standards with an inclusive society. There are lots of things you can do in education to include. And Singapore does a lot, places a lot of emphasis upon community. That's how it built the move beyond its terrible legacy of real hostility between Indians, Malays and Chinese. Right. And it's moved successfully beyond that. When I wrote The Future of Capitalism, the most interesting conversation I had on that was with a civil servant very high up in Singapore's Ministry of Community. Right. And he came to see me, and his book, his copy of The Future of Capitalism was full of yellow stickers. He'd really got loads of things to ask me. And he said, you've accurately described Singapore's problem. And I said, I thought it accurately described Singapore's success. He said, oh yeah, that's history. Yeah. But he said, you've really put your finger on Singapore's problem, right, which is that the most successful, the elite, are now no longer socially mixing with ordinary people. And so the elite are forming, as it were, a separate bunch within society, right, where they only talk to each other. Now, some of the successful will be Malays, some will be Chinese, some will be Indian. They talk to each other. It's not a racial thing, but it's a success that's alienated itself from ordinary people. And I said, how do you know? He said, oh, I know because we monitor all the social networks. So we know who's talking with other people, who they're talking to. And so we can see this detached social network of success that's now, there's very little overlap with the networks of ordinary people. So he said, I want to know, what do we do? So I said, don't worry, you're going to fix it, because the first step you've already taken, you've measured it. Right. If you'd measured it, it's much easier to improve it, because you've got a benchmark. You don't know how to improve it. You don't know how to get. Yeah. But if you don't know how, experiment. Try many different things and measure them. You will find that some systems, better integration in schools, for example, in America at one stage they did busing in schools. So you mix together people from social housing with people who are living in these fancy apartments and stuff. There are many things. Try them, see what happens. Sports clubs. Everybody wants to play football, so mix them up there and see what happens. And by measuring, you'll find some things work well and other things don't. And then you just scale the things that work. And that way you'll gradually fix the problem.
How I wish I have more time with you, sir. Thank you very much for having me here at the heart of Oxford, the Vatnik School of Government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.